Hello, good morning. Chaim Malevsky here, Chabad Family Programs. Today it's going to be a little bit different. My usual running commentary is a running commentary in Central Park or elsewhere, but apropos perhaps to this week's Torah portion in which our forefather Yaakov Avinu wrestles with an angel of Esav and gets injured in the process. And he limps away, but not before he extracts a very life-changing, name-changing blessing from the angel of Esav. So too, perhaps related, I injured my foot, so I won't be running for a few months now, unfortunately. The running commentaries have been literally the highlight of my week for the past few years, but I don't want to leave it, just completely drop it. So we're going to do a walking commentary or a healing commentary. Right now I can't walk yet properly, so I'm just going to stand. It'll be a standing commentary. But it's still a really beautiful thought that I'd like to share with you. And we're not in the park, but over here we're in the city with the sights and the sounds of the city. But the content is powerful, and I hope it resonates with you as well. So a few days ago, I was talking to a friend of mine. I'll call him David, not his real name. And he's telling me that he's going to South America or somewhere else for an extended period of time, but from New York. He lives in New York with his wife and family, and they're going. But as he's leaving, or before he's leaving, he told me that he spent the day configuring his Wi-Fi router to make it appear as if he's in New York City. Even though he's going to be in South America, whoever can check the IP address or whatever it is, anything that detects the location of his computer, his phone, his Wi-Fi, anything related to the Wi-Fi from the router will appear as if he's in New York City. Now, if you need his services, I'll set you up with him for whatever reasons he wants it. But now that just confirmed that I should share this content, this running commentary, this talk from the Rebbe that I heard. Because just that morning, I heard a talk from the Rebbe. I was thinking, is this a little bit too complicated for a running commentary? I said, you know what? You just nailed it. And here it goes. So the Rebbe says that in this week's Torah portion, it talks about how Yaakov met his brother Esav. And in that meeting, there was a lot of drama. But in the end, Esav actually offers Yaakov, he says, let's go together, let's continue together. And the sages talk about this and say that Esav was actually telling Yaakov, Mashiach is ready to come. The world is ready for Mashiach. Let's go ahead and make it happen. And Yaakov was really ready. Yaakov was ready because Yaakov was a tzaddik. But Yaakov said, you know what, I can't come now. Ad avai el adoni se'era. He says, he extended the trip. He says, I can't come now with you to greet Mashiach, to make this world a complete home for God. Although I'm ready, but the excuse or the reason he gave was, Ki hatzon v'habakar alot alai, udfakum yom echad v'metu kol hatzon. He said the sheep, the cattle, they're tender, they're too soft, they're not ready yet, they're not prepared. And if we go ahead and drive into Mashiach, into the end of times, he says they won't be ready and they'll die. And spiritually what this means is that the people aren't ready. Not just the children, the cattle, but the people are similar to cattle in the sense that we're not refined yet. And the world isn't ready for Mashiach, so said Yaakov to Esav. And if we drive and bring Mashiach hard, then people either won't get it or they're going to die. It's for various reasons that it's just not going to work. Similar to the story of Rabbi Akiva and the other three men who entered the Pardes, that entered the secrets of the Torah, and they couldn't handle it. So three of them, one died, one went crazy, one became an atheist, and Rabbi Akiva was, got out safely. It's similar to that idea. So the Rebbe says that here we see an example of Yaakov being ready for Mashiach, for the world's purpose to be fulfilled, but the people weren't ready, and therefore he remained behind. So it's a sacrifice on the part of this leader of our forefather Yaakov that he just didn't go where he was comfortable going, but he waited for the people. The Rebbe says we see the same thing with Moshe Rabbeinu. Our leader, the first Jewish leader, Moshe Rabbeinu, was in the desert, and we all know that he didn't go into Israel and that he was buried in the desert. But the Midrash says that God gave Moshe a choice, and he said, if you want to, you can go into Israel. I will let you go into Israel. However, it'll be without the people, without us, right here, me and you right now. Moshe was given the option to go into Israel, but he knew that if he goes into Israel, he's not going to inspire the rest of the diaspora. He won't be there. He will be there. He'll be fine. But Moshe sacrificed his own comfort of going into Israel and being in the Holy Land and being with God in the highest levels for us, for me and you here right now, because we are not in Israel yet, in the completed Israel yet. The Rebbe says, so too is with true leaders in all the generations. And he referred to the previous Rebbe. He said the previous Rebbe, he passed away in 1950, and he could have been buried in Israel, but he chose to be buried with his people because that's what tzaddikim do. True righteous people stay with their flock, stay with their community at the sacrifice, at whatever great sacrifice it is for them. And the Rebbe encouraged people to go and visit the previous Rebbe's Ohel, which we go today to the Rebbe's. We apply everything that the Rebbe said to us about the previous Rebbe, we apply to our Rebbe. So he said, go to visit the gravesite of a tzaddik. It's a portal to heaven, and it connects the highest level of your soul, the Yechida Shebenefesh, to the inner essence of God. But that's a portal. And the Rebbe says when we pray there, it opens up new fountains of ability for us to connect with God. And he said, in a way, Kikaro ve'lecha hadavar ma'od beficha u'bilvavcha lasoto. In a way that it makes it easier, beficha with your mouth, speech, vavcha with your heart, with your thoughts, with your feelings, lasoto with your action, machshava, dibur, maaseh, thought, speech, and action. And that is connected also to tonight, actually, is Yud Tes Kislev. Shabbos is the 19th day of Kislev, which is the Rosh Hashanah for Hasidus, which is also another completely new portal into the freedom of learning Hasidus, which is another talk, but you can research that on your own. But the Rebbe said over here that when we go to the gravesite of a tzaddik, we're going straight to God. Now, we also know, and here's a challenge that the Rebbe blows my mind with this. He says we also know that all our prayers go through Israel. That's the standard. The prayers go through Israel. So if the prayers go through Israel, how is it that we pray at the gravesite of a tzaddik over here in New York and the prayers are going through Israel? Said the Rebbe a fascinating thing. He said that there's a law. It talks about in the Talmud what will happen when Mashiach comes. It says that all the dead will arise. All the people will be back in Israel and alive again. Now, what will happen with the tzaddikim, with the righteous people? It says the Talmud says that for the tzaddikim, God will create tunnels that will go from underground, because they won't arise outside of Eretz Yisrael, outside of Israel. It's not a holy place for them. So God will create tunnels that will go from underground, from their grave, all the way into Israel. And it will open up in Israel. So they're going to basically roll somehow, get maybe a bullet train, whatever it is, but it's going to be an underground tunnel to Israel. And, says the Rebbe, there's a law in the Jewish law, obviously, that if somebody builds a tunnel underground in an unholy place in Israel, like in the base near the Beit HaMikdash, let's say, but the opening of the tunnel is in a holy place, like in the Beit HaMikdash area, then the contents of the tunnel, the inside of the tunnel, is rendered holy. That means the contents of the inside of a tunnel, the status of the inside of the tunnel is rendered by its opening. Where is its opening? If its opening is in an unholy place, then the inside of the tunnel is unholy. If its opening is in a holy place, the inside of the tunnel is holy. So too, says the Rebbe, with the grave sites of a tzaddikim, of the righteous people, where when Mashiach comes, there will be a tunnel going straight from the grave all the way to Israel. So too, the entrance, the opening of the tunnel is going to be in Israel. That makes the whole tunnel and the grave itself holy, like Israel. Hence, our prayers go from the gravesite through the tunnel up into Israel. Sounds great, but, says the Rebbe, what's the obvious question? The obvious question is that it didn't happen yet, that that tunnel wasn't yet made, right? It's going to happen when Mashiach comes. So how is it that now, when we go pray at the gravesite of a tzaddik, our prayers are funneled right into Israel? How is that? So for this, the Rebbe brings another amazing law, and he applies it here. And the Rebbe says that the law is that if in laws of purity and impurity, there are certain places where a Kohen, where a priest is not allowed to go, and if he goes, then he becomes impure. And certain foods or items, if they come in contact with bottom line is, if it come in contact with a dead body, that's the highest form of impurity, then a Kohen is not allowed to access it and not allowed to touch it, etc., etc. There are lots of laws of purity, Tuma and Tahara. Says the Rebbe, there's a fascinating law. If there's a dead body in a home that has 4 or more doors, that has many different entrances, and you put some food or an item under one of the doorposts, like in the entrance, but not in the home itself, then if all the doors are closed, the status of the home is impure, and the food that is in that doorpost is rendered impure. It's tameh. Okay, so we have that. Now, what happens if we know for certain that the dead body is going to exit out of, let's say, door number 3, but door number 1, 2, and 4 are going to remain closed? Then what happens is that door number 3 assumes the status of impurity, and doors number 1, 2, and 4, they're pure. You can put things under it, you can have food under it, you can have whatever is truma, or different kinds of things that are sensitive to the Kohen status of purity and impurity, but they're not going to be rendered impure, because it's known in the future that the dead body will exit through door number 3. Says the Rebbe, if this is the case in a negative situation, in an impure situation, where something is rendered impure because of a future opening, a future exit of this dead body, then meruba mida tova mimida per anus. There's a standard understanding that the good outperforms the bad, that a good measure is always stronger than a negative. A positive is always stronger than a negative. So too, says the Rebbe, we can apply this rule to the gravesite of a tzaddik and its future opening in Israel through the tunnel when Mashiach comes. And he says that if the house door that the dead body is going to go out later becomes impure, even though it didn't happen, then how much more so that this tunnel that has not yet been built, but it's going to happen, and it's going to open in Israel from the gravesite of the tzaddik all the way through Israel. How much more so that the status of purity, and Israel applies now to the gravesite of a tzaddik. And hence, because of that, our prayers, when we pray at a gravesite of a tzaddik, of a holy person, which we call the Rebbe's Ohel today, then our prayers go directly to Israel. It's as if we are standing in Israel. And the Rebbe said, put it up one more notch. And he said that even the Israel of today experienced the Churban, experienced the destruction of the temple. But true righteous people, in their level of consciousness, they don't even experience the destruction of the temple. Like Yaakov Avinu, he was already there with Mashiach. Moshe was already there. And the Rebbe applied this to our previous Rebbe also, and we apply it to the Rebbe. In some sense, their souls are such a high level of consciousness that they don't even experience the destruction of the temple. So, which means to say technically that when we go to pray at the gravesite of a tzaddik, we're even closer to the true Jerusalem, to the true rebuilt Israel, than if we would be in Israel physically ourselves. That's it for today. That's a beautiful thought that I heard from the Rebbe, and it was all triggered again by this Wi-Fi router that my friend David is rerouting, so that when he is in South America, it'll look like he's in New York. Similarly, when we're in the Rebbe's Ohel, and I urge you all to go if you haven't been yet, or go again if you have, that blessings come from there, and we're actually in Israel when we're at the Rebbe's Ohel. God bless you all, and thank you all for your outpouring of love and concern and well wishes for my plantar fasciatia rupture. Can't even pronounce it. And we'll be in touch. Shabbat Shalom, and a good Yantif for tonight for Yitas Kislev.